Hey friendos, hair is dry today. What I want to talk about today is how to have better ideas. Now, on the one hand, ideas aren't everything. On the other, there's something to be said for obviously some are a better foundation to work from than others. And we'll talk about where and how you go about that because it's actually a weirdly easy, easy in concept process, hard in practice. And the only thing I've ever done in my entire life that has got me to get to better ideas, whether I was doing experimental gameplay prototyping, whether I was writing books, writing articles, whether I was working on my master's thesis, and doing other research work, any kind of work I've done, level design, etc. The way to get better ideas is to do something with the ideas that you have until you run out of them. At any given time, all of us have several ideas floating around in our head of games we'd like to make, stories we'd like to tell, spaces we might design, if that's kind of the area that you're in. But until you do something with them, what you've got are stale, rotten, stagnant, surface level. Frankly, the same inspirations, the same adjacent possibilities everybody else out there who are coming from the recent shows, the recent movies, the recent other stuff, the recent other games they've played. Same inspirations as everybody else, and the ideas aren't that creative, aren't that unusual, aren't that interesting. Now, we fool ourselves into thinking they are, a bit like when you're dreaming and you sleep and you fool yourself into thinking that you've got a brilliant plan, you wake up and realize it's rubbish. But until you do something with ideas, it's really easy to trick ourselves into obsessing over them, that if we just got a chance, if someone just gave us a shot to do something with it. And the trick is that you got to find whatever version of it you can do yourself. Whatever version doesn't require some outside person to give you permission or to put you in the spot to do it. So in other words, let's say you got an idea for a story. What's probably not going to happen is that somebody just up out of nowhere offers you tens of millions of dollars plus, I don't know the budget of TV shows days, I'm showing more than that, to shoot a full-scale television show. Seems unlikely unless you happen to be already in those circles, in which case you're not listening to these videos. Actually, maybe a couple of you are. I know you guys. But in any other situation, it becomes, okay, what can you do with that story? Can you write a short story? Of course you can. Can you write yourself a small book out of it? Probably. Do what you can do on your own scale at your own size. And in the process, it's not because it's going to finally get your brilliance out of there. It's because it's going to let you dig one layer deeper. It's because you start getting real creative and real interesting and better about your process once you clear your stack. Once your first idea failed you, your second idea failed you, your entire fallback list of backup plans failed you, that's where it starts to get really interesting. That's where a couple things then start to happen. One, we become more aware of what we're putting into that hopper. We become much more careful or conscientious about, okay, well, so it turns out that not everything that comes to mind is necessarily worth doing. But it's hard to really convince ourselves of that until we've tried to do our stuff. Because otherwise, I'll tell you the other thing that happens. If you try to circumvent that, and you want to hang on to those ideas until later because you think they're great, one of the things that happens is that, again, they're still stagnant. They're still as bad as they ever were. But we, again, fool ourselves into like, okay, well, then that becomes the backup plan. That's why I'm saying exhaust the ones that are in your queue. Do something with it. And once you do, then that's when you can finally kind of get to the point of humility or over your own pride or ego of thinking that the idea is somehow of any sort of merit just because it came to you or you had it. And it starts getting you a little more conscientious of, depending on what I want to do with it, do I care what other people think about it? Even if it's something only I care about or the things that would be more meaningful to me, that if I'm going to go that direction, and you always kind of make these trade-offs, right, as to making something for other people, making something for yourself. It's a trade-off you can make as a creative person, as a content creator, as a business person for that matter, depending on what your goals are and what your aims are and who else's finances are tied up in it. But in those decisions, you can decide that, okay, if I want to go off and do my own weird thing, in that case, you can really lean into that and go way off kind of the deep end into the weird and to really engaging with your stuff. And that's where the personality is going to shine in a way that it's not. If you're trying to straddle the middle ground of keeping 1 or 2 feet over in the, well, I'm trying to do some market research and focus testing, and there's kind of a deep divide there in the middle. But either way, so you get more aware of what is your purpose in picking ideas. Gets you to articulate that better. The other thing is you also start to realize the extent to which, and again, I mean, everybody knows like execution matters more than the idea. We know that, we hear it. It's one of these things that people who seem to really get that and understand the implications of it are mostly the ones who've worn themselves out trying to get ideas to be what counted. But only after you've kind of exhausted a bunch of them do you start to kind of really let it sink in and affect your actions, that really it's less about the idea you're working from and more about which idea you're really committed to finding some way to make it work, to finding some way to make it exist in a worthwhile way. And when I say committed to finding a way, I don't just mean hammering at it as it initially came out of your mind. Part of this thing where we decide that this is what I'm committed to make work means, again, this sort of, just like the other thing, a matter of getting over our own hubris, our own ego, finding some humility as to, all right, there might be some process that would improve this. There might be feedback that I need. There might be outside expertise that I would benefit from even a few minutes of their time, or studying their work or something, or considering possible changes to this thing different from how I'd initially conceived it, to give it time, to revisit it, to iterate on it, to continue to work on it, to make it into something better, because I'm committed to this idea and finding a way to make this idea work. This is true, again, whether it's creative stuff, whether it's business stuff, all sorts of things this applies to. If you want better ideas, exhaust the supply of ideas you got, run out of them, do something with it. There's kind of this old saying, right? The best camera is the camera you have on you. And it's why, say old saying, can't be that old because it's mostly about phones and stuff, right? But I mean, like, this camera, it's on me. So even though this camera is better, I'm not lugging this everywhere I go, especially with a long lens on it. So this is the camera I get. I mentioned that here because I think it's a comparable point as to saying that the best thing you can do with your idea is the thing that is within reach, the thing that you can do with it. And so, like I say, there is, whether or not there is some future in which somebody funds the production of a TV show idea, a commercial grade game idea, multi-year budget with a staff team of full-timers, experience, etc. At minimum, even if that is a possible future, even if, there is definitely still a step in that timeline that consists of you having made some crummier proof of concept, shoestring budget, held together with duct tape and staples and string version of it, that then you can showcase, that you can put in front of others, that you were able to iterate on, get feedback on, potentially release and get some traffic numbers on. Potentially, one of the things that happens, right, is if you find something that just really absolutely addresses a need, speaks to people, resonates with them in some deeper way, etc., they will overlook so many flaws about it. Not everybody, but there are people who will just love it and all its brokenness to a level at which they are so into it they will get annoyed at you when you start to clean it up so the rest of the general public wants it. But that's how you know you're onto something, and you don't get there ever if you don't let yourself do the thing that's the size you can do it at. Because that's the only way you can clear your idea of queues, or clear your queue of ideas, right? You can't, each one of those, go into full production on each one of those. You can't raise funding for every single one of those. It's going to be that shoestring. It's going to be the cheap version, the proof of concept, the prototype, literally the short story version, to get it out of your system, to feel, okay, I've run out of my easy ideas. Which of these is worth developing, maybe based on people's feedback, or what do I do next? And that's where it starts to get interesting. You have to get more a little creative when you've run out of your easy stuff. Get a little metacognitive about your process. Anyway, I've kind of already breached the second subject today, so I'm going to cut it off for now. Thanks for tuning in. Have another video for you all tomorrow.